Welcome back, Mr. Goodberry. The First Star Logistics studio is fully equipped and ready to record.
Welcome back to Bengals on the Brain, presented by First Star Logistics. I'm your host, Joe Goodberry. This is episode 94, and we're going to continue our countdown of the greatest 100 Bengals of all time. And if you missed the previous episode, I broke down how the formula and how I came to these rankings. But there's going to be some specific players in today's episode. We're going to do the next 8. It'll get us to player number 85. And a few of these players here will help explain the process as we get to them, because there's only 2 guys on this entire 100 player list that only played for the Bengals for 2 years or less. One of them's ranked fairly high in the top 50, let's say. One of them is going to be on today's episode. And I thought of this as I was about to record reading the comments from the last episode of the first episode, the first grouping of players. And a lot of people said, and agreed on Twitter as well, that Deltha O'Neal should be much higher. He had a 10 interception season. And I agree. Like, if this was more based on the best players to ever play for the Bengals or the best seasons, I mean, these are all different. This is good content. You want to create content that's a little bit different than the greatest players. To me, greatest signifies your importance, your impact. And I wanted to really weight it towards the players that spent the most time in Cincinnati and played the most games in Cincinnati and their impact that way, right? Of playing multiple years at a high level, if possible. Guys like Deltha O'Neal, Torrey James had 8 interceptions, right? So they were very close. Eric Thomas had a great, one great year as well. They were all bunched and sandwiched together because while Eric Thomas played more in Cincinnati, which is why he ended up being higher than of the 3, Deltha O'Neal and Torrey James didn't spend a ton of time in Cincinnati, and they only made 1 playoff appearance with the team. So that is going to be an impact, and it's going to show you how the rest of the list goes. And as we pick it up today and we move on into the next grouping, remember, this is the end of the top 100. I think these were all good players and players worthy of paying attention to, but someone who didn't make the list. Last point before we jump right in, I don't want to keep it too long. 101 is Terrence Newman, very similar to Deltha O'Neal, Torrey James. Free agent acquisition. He was a very cheap one for the Bengals. Not that Torrey James is very expensive, and they got Deltha O'Neal for cheap. We talked about that. But Newman didn't have that 8 or 10 interception season, but he was really good with Mike Zimmer and this defense and had some big plays and helped out and got this team to the playoffs multiple years. So that's why he was close to making the list and just missed the cutoff behind Vinny Ray, who played for 9 years in Cincinnati, which is a big thing for him. And Tyler Eifert, who again only had 1 great year, which is why he was at number 99. We left off with Tony McGee at number 93. Number 92 is offensive lineman, our first offensive lineman on this list, Brian Blados. The former first-round pick in 1984 played 8 seasons for the Cincinnati Bengals.
Big line, Munoz, Reimers, Kozerski, Montoya, and Blados. They average around 290.
Blados played in 98 games for the Bengals, starting 60. He started games at left tackle, left guard, and here you see him at right tackle in number 74. He even played center when the Bengals needed him to. Known for being a run blocker at North Carolina, Blados blocked for 3 different 1,000-yard rushers in college. His second season in the NFL in 1985, he made Sports Illustrated all-first team at guard for the Bengals. This after making the Pro Football Writers Association all-rookie team in 1984 after he was the 28th overall pick in the first round. And for all his versatility on the offensive line, Blados would line up at tight end a bunch for the Bengals in heavy packages as a primary backup. He even caught a pass for 4 yards in his sophomore season.
Boomer on a quick snap, back there to throw. Looks, goes down the sideline. Yes. Out to Eddie Brown, yes. Touchdown.
Blados' early success would not lead into the middle parts of his career, as the 1985 season would be the last time he starts more than 10 games for the Bengals. In 1986, he only started 8, playing in all 16, dressing for all 16, I should say. In 87, he only started 4 games, and then in 1988, only starting 1 game for the Bengals until the playoffs came, where he started all 3 games for Cincinnati at right tackle, getting them to that Super Bowl and helping to block for one of the best offenses in the league and the league MVP in Boomer Esiason. So you had these weapons. The offensive line was really good, and you needed a quality backup like a Brian Blados to step in and start. And like I said, he was a backup for the mid part of his career, but he did start over 60 games for the
Yet
Bengals.
even during this period of unfinished business, the team that Paul Brown built and Weich guided stuck together like champions.
Brian Blados was cut midway through the 1991 season, and Boomer Esiason wore 74 on the back of his helmet in solidarity and showing that he wasn't happy with that move. This was around the time that free agency was starting as well, and Max Montoya left, and Plan B free agency. Brian Blados was pegged to replace him at the right guard spot. He was unable to hold that position and ultimately left to go for the Indianapolis Colts and then signed with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers the following offseason before his career was over. And again, we're in the 90s here, so we've got guys that were role players or spot starters or key members or timely members of very good teams. And I would say Brian Blados was that for the 1988 AFC champion Cincinnati Bengals. Moving on to number 91. We're going to go with a receiver for the first time on this list. The Bengals have a ton of receivers in their top 100. This is the first one we'll get. Former Pro Bowler Chip Meyers.
Carter finally spotted Chip Meyers, number 25, to set up one score, and later hit him for a touchdown.
The former 10th round pick of the San Francisco 49ers out of Northwest Dakota State in 1967, Chip Meyers would play the 1968 season for the Alabama Hawks, which was a Continental Football League team, before signing with the Bengals and playing from 1969 until his career finished in 1976. 108 games in his career, 96 games for the Bengals, starting 43. Philip Leon Meyers went by Chip, and his best season was 1972, the year he went to the Pro Bowl, where he started and played in 14 games, catching 57 balls for 792 yards and 3 touchdowns. Remember, this was a different era. Catching 800 yards in a season in 1972 was very good. You can see the size, listed over 6'4", the strong hands, the body control, the speed downfield. He was a good player for the Bengals when they needed a receiver in the early 70s. If you don't believe me, look at these clips of him beating Willie Brown and frustrating Willie Brown, the future Hall of Famer for the Oakland Raiders. LA Raiders? Not sure at this time, actually. But he is mad about it.
Making his first start since 1972, Reeves was solid in the touchdown department as well. And this 34-yarder to Chip Meyers put the first Bengal points on the board. But the execution was up to Reeves, and his second touchdown to Meyers was all any coach could ask for.
Trailing 7-3 with only 10 minutes left, Ken Anderson turned to the man Coach Bill Johnson calls the best clutch receiver in the NFL, Chip Meyers. Wide receiver Meyers, number 25, who once played with 2 broken arms, this time was only playing with a broken nose, and he made the lead touchdown look easy.
Gotta love 1970s football. Played with 2 broken arms, this time just a broken nose. All right. Chip Meyers, in his 8 years with the Bengals, would catch over 218 passes, 3,000 yards. I should have said over 3,000 yards, not over 218 passes. It was 218 passes, over 3,000 yards, and 12 touchdowns, which for them was I mean, that was the time. That was solid numbers. So Chip Meyers, if you didn't know who he was, we're now in the top 90 with number 90, going back to the offensive line with easily the best player. Easily the best player. But the greatest Bengal, this is where this list is going to need some explaining. Number 90 is Richmond Webb. The Bengals signed Webb before the 2001 season, and he only played 2 years for Cincinnati.
Well, up front for Cincinnati, the Bengals have allowed just 3 sacks through the first 4 games. Webb has been a great addition, and the Cincinnati coaches think Willie Anderson might be the best right tackle in the NFL.
The Bengals really needed a left tackle, and they signed him in free agency, knowing he was getting over the hill, knowing that he could still be a very good player. This would be like signing Trent Williams for the final 2 years of his career. Like right now, if you did that, I don't think anyone would have a problem with that. You already had Willie Anderson on the right side. You bookend these two together, and you have 2 really good tackles in the AFC North Central at the time.
Look at that. That's a big hole now. And coming around is Richmond Webb. The offensive line of the Bengals are getting movement.
So while he wasn't expected to block for a great quarterback situation, he was blocking for the great Corey Dillon.
Run to remember on the first play from scrimmage.
Hand off Corey Dillon looking for a hole. Got one! 10, 15, 20. He is gone! Bye-bye. Will they chase him? 40, 35, 30. Corey Dillon is in the end zone. Wow. Touchdown! Wow!
Corey Dillon's 96-yard run.
So how does a player that only started 20 games for the Bengals make this list? Well, the former first overall pick, 9th overall in 1990, Richmond Webb was a 2-time first-team All-Pro in 92 and 94, a 2-time second-team All-Pro in 93 and 95. He was a 7-time Pro Bowler from 1990, his rookie year, until 1996. He was also named to the 1990s All-Decade Team, the Pro Football Writers Association All-Rookie Team in 1990, and he would eventually be the 16th player inducted into the Miami Dolphins Ring of Honor. So yes, Richmond Webb's greatness cannot be denied as an NFL player, but what does that have to do with the Bengals? It wasn't a great team to watch, but the building blocks were there for the team we eventually saw in 2003 and 2004, 2005. That was a lot of fun to watch. Chad Johnson as a rookie, Darnay Scott was still there, TJ Hashimzada as a rookie, Peter Warrick, Corey Dillon, obviously, and players like Takeo Spikes, Justin Smith, and Brian Simmons on the defensive side of the ball. So then on the offensive line, you had Willie Anderson on the right side. You had Richie Bram at center, Mike Goff, who played a bunch for the Bengals. So Richmond Webb was just a piece, a building block, a stepping stone into that team that finally got the Bengals out of the 90s. So I don't know if he played a big role, but in 2002, they did draft Levi Jones in the first round, and that was the last year that Richmond Webb would play for the Bengals. He started the first 4 games and then handed it over to Levi Jones, who had a very good rookie year. So some mentorship there, some passing of the torch from a guy who, in my opinion, Richmond Webb should probably be in the Hall of Fame. And maybe if we had a little bit of push from the Bengals side, we could marry the 2 teams together. He's got a strong enough case with just the Miami Dolphins. But Richmond Webb, tremendous player that played 2 seasons, fits the criteria. He'd probably be a top 15 player in franchise history if he spent the whole time in Cincinnati, which obviously is not the case, but he's a top 16 player for the Miami Dolphins. I feel like if you're young, a lot of these players so far have been pretty obscure for you. Maybe not the guys in the late 90s to the 100 ranking from last episode, but so far here with Chip Meyers and even I think Richmond Webb. If you didn't watch the Dolphins in the 90s, you probably don't know who he is and probably don't even remember that he played for the Bengals, but we're going to keep that going, that theme of obscurity with a DN, defensive tackle, depending on different game back then to what it is now. I would consider him a defensive tackle, but did play DN a lot. Number 70 on the field is number 89 for us, Ron Carpenter.
Ron Carpenter, defensive tackle, Thomasville, North Carolina.
decisively on Oakland's next series. For the third straight time, they gave up the football, this time on a fumble recovery by Ron Carpenter, number 70.
Ron Carpenter was a second-round pick, 32nd overall, out of NC State in the 1970 draft. He would only play for the Cincinnati Bengals. He would finish 7 seasons, starting 86 games and playing in 97 for Cincinnati. He would accumulate 45.5 sacks over that 7 years, with 10 coming in 1973 and 13 total sacks coming in 1974. He also added 10 fumble recoveries in those 7 seasons. In his 7-year career, Carpenter would be a part of 3 playoff teams, 1970, 1973, 1975, when the Bengals had a very good defense during that run. He played on a defensive line that's going to have a bunch of guys on here. One guy that's not going to make the list, but I really grew fond of while watching these old games, was Royce Berry. We talked about Sherman White in the last episode, but Berry was the other defensive end. You had Ron Carpenter inside. You had Mike Reed. The linebackers were good. I really grew to really like this defensive front for the early 70s Bengals teams. You know, remember, this team just started in 1968. So for them to quickly turn around and get into the playoffs in 1970, when Carpenter started 14 games as a rookie for them, that's pretty impressive and says a lot about him as a player.
So emphatically did the Bengals bust the Vikings that for the first time in 162 games, the Minnesota Machine did not register a single point.
Phipps fumbled, and when Royce Berry recovered, the Browns' gut comeback was all but over. They seemed to sense it, and the emotion-drenched game left some of the players a bit testy.
So Ron Carpenter comes in at 89. Never, when I'm watching these old games, never looked like the biggest or most athletic guy, but was a pain to block for offensive linemen. You could definitely see that, and continued to fight and claw and rally his way to the ball, which is probably how he ended up with 10 fumble recoveries in his 7 seasons. But just hovering around that 100 games played mark so far for a lot of these guys that maybe weren't the most talented, like the Vinny Rays. You get to that 100 games played in Cincinnati, you're going to rank pretty highly on this list. Not a lot of players have surpassed 100 games played. I mean, think of like right now, we love Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase. Joe Burrow's at 52 games, I believe. I'm going off memory, but that lets you know, like, these guys have played for a long time. And now we're going to number 88 on this list. And it's a name you'll remember, especially if you like college football. It's Dave Remington. If you like college football, the best center in the country is given the Dave Remington Award every year. And it's named after him, of course, because he was the Outland Trophy winner coming out of Nebraska in 1983. Very, very good player in college football. Obviously, had all the accolades, all the decorations. The Bengals took him in the first round, 25th overall, and he would start right away, starting 11 of 12 games he played in the 83 season.
Remington up front, got the job done.
And then would go on to start 16, and then 12 before he had a shortened season for the strike shortened season, only starting and playing in 8 games in 1987 before finishing his career with 2 years for the Philadelphia Eagles.
We saw Brooks break off a big gainer. You have a great offensive line. They're huge. Remington in the middle, Anthony Muniz, the left tackle. Why put the burden on them to go through this kind of an offensive set? Of course, Sam White says it doesn't trouble them, but I have to question whether or not it isn't kind of overloading the circuits.
That mid-'80s Bengals team was a high-flying offense led by its no-huddle attack, and Dave Remington was the center. A lot of communication, a lot of burden placed on him, and he was more of the big, strong, power, run-blocking type.
On an all-out blitz, leaving no one to tackle the
In
speedy
all,
Brooks
it would
who
just be
broke the
5
contain
years for the
and was
Cincinnati
home
Bengals.
free.
64 games played with 63 starts for a very high-powered offense in the mid-80s. Remington wore 3 numbers for the Bengals. So if you see these clips, he's wearing 64, 52, and 50. 50 was the number he wore in college, so he eventually was able to move and get that number in Cincinnati. Despite making the Pro Football Writers Association all-rookie team in 1983, it is fair to say that Dave Remington did not live up to the lofty status of a first-round pick. Sure, he played in the league for a long time, from 83 to 89. That's a great career, but at the same time, he was so good. He was such a legend at the college football level that him just being a solid player for a potent offense probably disappointed some fans. That's now 3 offensive linemen in today's episode as we are now hitting the mid-80s. We're going to go back to the defensive back room. But this time, we're going with a safety, one of the most fun players we'll have on this list. An exciting player that, almost hit his peak for a long time and probably would have been considered one of the all-time greats for the Bengals. Number 87 on this list is safety, Daryl Williams.
Number 31, safety Daryl Williams, came in a draft day treasure trove that saw the team's top 6 picks contribute heavily. No one contributed more than Williams, whose heavy hitting and sure tackling made number 31 a number opponents learned to fear.
That's right, another high draft pick. Daryl Williams was a first rounder out of Miami, the 28th overall pick in the 1992 draft. He played for the Bengals, go to the Seattle Seahawks, and then come back to Cincinnati later on.
The former Miami Hurricane led the team in interceptions and pass deflections and appears on track to becoming a Pro Bowl player.
After being drafted in his first stint with the Bengals, Daryl Williams would start 60 games in his first 4 years in Cincinnati with 9 interceptions and 3 forced fumbles and another 5 fumble recoveries. He was an impact player early on.
Season Daryl Williams had in 1993.
He is just an outstanding football player, the kind of intimidator that is necessary if you're going to win games in the National Football League, both against the run and when people try to run over the middle. So as far as the real bright spot, what I saw this year, I'd say Daryl Williams.
He left for Seattle in free agency, played 4 years there, and would be a second-team All-Pro and Pro Bowler in 1997.
It's difficult to get attention when you're on a losing team, but Daryl Williams sparked the NFL's 3rd best pass defense by playing like an All-Pro, leading the team in tackles, and staking a future claim as the best free safety in the game.
Despite that 1997 season, I don't think Daryl Williams ever achieved that best free safety in the league label you just heard there. But when he did come back to the Bengals, he started all 16 games for 1 season. Before 2001 came, he only started 1 game, playing in 15. In all 6 years in Cincinnati, 95 games played, 77 starts. And in those 77 starts in those 6 years with the Bengals, Daryl Williams would have 11 interceptions, 2 touchdowns, 7 passes defense, 6 forced fumbles, and 9 fumble recoveries. A physical free safety that would hit and lay guys out. That's why I use that picture to start here with him knocking the ball away from Anthony Becht, who was a 270-pound tight end. I remember that one. But, yeah, fun times for Daryl Williams, who could have honestly been top 30, I think, had he stayed in Cincinnati and had those best years with the Bengals. 3 offensive linemen, a defensive lineman, a safety, and a wide receiver, Chip Meyers. In today's episode, we're going to finish the last 2 with the same position. It's running back. And the Bengals are going to have a ton of running backs. Corners, wide receivers, running backs, offensive linemen. But we haven't had a running back yet. And this is the first one of 2 to finish this episode. Harold Green at number 86. In Cincinnati, the leading running back wears either 28 or 32. I don't make the rules. That's what they wear. Harold Green, of course, wore number 28. The Bengals drafted him in the 2nd round, 38th overall in the 1990 draft out of South Carolina. Green didn't play all that much that rookie year, just 83 carries for 353 yards and a touchdown, but he would eventually have a big season in his third season where he went to the Pro Bowl in 1992 after playing in all 16 games, carrying the ball 265 times for 1,170 yards and just 2 touchdowns. He also caught the ball 41 times that year for 214 yards. He was a dual threat with good size and good long speed, over 1,380 yards from scrimmage on offense in 1992.
Defenders for 30 yards. Tommy, the latest Bengal load.
Yeah, Harold Green is 6'2", 222 pounds. You see that you can't arm tackle him once he gets into the secondary. Has the strength to drive through people and the quickness to go around people.
The long distance running of number 28, Harold Green, who romped for 123 yards, including a bolt for 55.
Harold Green couldn't sustain the success of the 1992 season, and in 1993 only had 589 yards rushing on 215 carries. If that sounds really low, that's 2.7 yards per carry in 93. He'd follow that up with a 2.9 yards per carry in 1994, and from there he was really just a part-time splitting committee type back. The most he'd ever touched the ball in a season would be 171 times in 1995. In all, 6 seasons in Cincinnati, 86 games played, 75 starts, 968 carries, 3,727 yards, and 8 touchdowns on the ground. Through the air, he would have another 145 catches, 1,004 yards, and 3 receiving touchdowns. Yeah, that 1993 season, that's the lowest for any running back with 200 carries in a season. That is still the record today. But that's off the 1992 Pro Bowl year, and the highlights for Harold Green are really, really good. So, it is what it is. I think 86 is fair for him to come out on this list because I think he definitely deserves to be on this list. Guys that are just missing it at running back, or the next one would be Jeremy Hill. And I think that makes sense. There's a cutoff line there because of probably how we view Hill with the playoff fumble, right? The next guy, though, I think should be a few spots ahead of Harold Green, and I remember him fondly. But, again, short success span running backs, they all do, right? But this guy, I miss him for a few reasons. Number one, miss him on the field because he was such a good player, but miss him number two because he passed away recently, and that is at 85th on the 100 greatest Bengals of all time, running back Cedric Benson. The 2004 Doak Walker Award winner Cedric Benson was selected by the Chicago Bears 4th overall in the 2005 draft. Things did not work out in Chicago, and the Bengals were down and needing a running back in 2008. That was the year that Carson Palmer got hurt, and they needed to rely on the run game and the defense, and Chris Perry wasn't working, and they signed Larry Johnson and all these guys, and they brought in Cedric Benson off the street and did not look back. The guy grabbed the job by the horns, no pun intended, and ran with it. No pun intended again, or maybe I did. And Cedric Benson was so good. He was such a different guy than what we saw in Chicago, and he looked like the guy that was coming out of Texas that was the top 5 pick overall. I mean, he had power. He had good long speed. He could catch well enough for being a big bruising back, and he was exactly what the Bengals needed as they transformed their offense in 2009, getting Carson Palmer back from that UCL elbow injury that looked like hampered him just a little bit in 2009. The passing game really wasn't there. They didn't have the weapons, yes, that's true, but they remade the offensive line and they remade the identity of the team and they focused it around Cedric Benson and they ran the ball and played defense, swept the division in 2009, and got to the playoffs for the first time since 2005. Benson ended up spending 4 years in Cincinnati, his best season and being that 2009 season where he had 1,251 yards rushing on the ground. That was a career high, obviously. In his 4 years in Cincinnati, he had 3 1,000-yard rushing seasons, totaling 4,176 yards on the ground with 21 touchdowns. Cedric Benson would play 56 games for the Bengals, more games played for the Bengals, more yards for the Bengals, all the stats, all the numbers. In my opinion, he is a career Bengal. It kind of personally makes me upset. No, not that bad. But when I see him in a Chicago Bear uniform as a picture, and I'm like, no, you guys cut him. The Bengals scooped him up. He's one of the best in-season acquisitions they've ever made. And he had his best years, and he had his career rejuvenated in Cincinnati. And he deserves this 85th spot overall. One of the few guys so far of the 15 we've done that did not make a Pro Bowl for the Bengals or did not make a Pro Bowl in his career. But Cedric Benson was a good player. And it's going to be 5 years ago. I know I made it sound like it was recent that he passed away, but it's going to be 5 years ago this August. Rest in peace, Cedric Benson, 32 and 28. We've got a couple more of those coming up for sure of each, I think, easily. But also, I wanted to give a shout out to Brennan Warner. I cut off your name on that video there. I'm sorry, buddy. I know you made that video and you posted it on Twitter. That's why I wanted to put your name in there. Same with Nasty Natty. You guys, anyone that posts this stuff on Twitter with cut-ups of these guys, and if I can use it and save myself some time, I will, and try and give you guys credit. So I appreciate the people out there that are doing the work and helping us out as content creators. Until next time, this has been Bengals on the Brain, presented by First Star Logistics, and I'm your host, Joe Goodberry. And the list is going to get better and better. We're just going to start hitting this next group here. Is really fun as I've started to make the graphics already, and I'm like, okay, it's going to be someone's favorite player in pretty much every episode from this point forward.
Dave Lapham here, and every day I am grateful for my experience to have played professional football. As a player, I realize self-motivation, leadership, and appreciating your teammates are key. At First Star Logistics, you can use those same attributes to create the life you want for you and your family. Build your future by working hard like I did. You'll see results both on and off the field. Call First Star Logistics today and be part of our winning team.
Opportunity knocking.